Cool. Hey everyone, welcome back to the fourth episode of my Music by the Month recap series. It's currently the last day of April, which of course is the fourth month, which means it's time for another another song release, and also another release of one of these episodes. So let's just get straight into the FL Studio project, and I'll start running down the song. Alright, so looking into the project here, so assuming you've already heard the song, it should be on the channel right now. And the groove I went for this was a very sort of retro synthwave, not really 80s style, but more was trying to just imitate that feel with it. And that sort of fit in with the narrative that I wanted to sort of go through with this, which was the idea of a person either building a rocket ship and then going to space, just sort of that idea of leaving Earth. And I sort of just felt like the elements of the electronic retro style sort of fit in with the almost nostalgic, dreamy themes of the story. Yeah, so I'll play a little bit of just the groove here, just to get an idea of it. So it's a very energetic sound, especially with that big brass synth going on with the melody. I feel like it's just really captures the energy, which is what I wanted to have. Looking at the specific melody, I wanted a very triumphant sound, I guess, and very confident, confident sound that really drives the groove forward. And with that, I sort of, that's why I sort of chose that synth brass sound here. And it's very simple as well. Yeah, the reason I kept the melody quite simple is so that it could sort of, I can manipulate it later on without really taking away or adding too much to the melody. Or just the bass melody, still keep the same idea. And that's shown later on here when I add in the octaves and then some later harmonies, which I guess just builds up and up. That builds just up and up through the as the song progresses. Another idea that I kept going back to was these really big crashes, and sort of how it just these big stabs that keep coming through, almost too regularly. But I sort of wanted to almost overwhelm the listener at this first part, to then be able to go and contrast it and really just have a unique emotion going on. So I'll play it just so you get the idea. And especially at the end of each measure, there's the extra big significant hit that cuts out, and then it has this very high-pitched synths that sort of cut and then fade down, which has a very big explosive effect. That's sort of the ideas that I wanted to go through with the first section here. I'm not going to play too much of it because you just go listen to it on the other video that's posted now as well. But sort of the idea, I really wanted a very broad, confident, and just driving sound to open up the main part of the narrative. So the song's split into 3 sections, and I feel like I just did that because, one, it tends to keep it interesting, not having the same thing going for too long, and also I wanted to lay down a lot of ideas that I could expand later on in the narrative, as I plan to keep the same narrative of going to space and sort of drag it out over a few songs. So establishing all the ideas in this first one means I can go and elaborate on them later on in different pieces that may not be seen now. So this first one may seem like a lot of ideas just crammed together, but in the bigger picture, it'll all come together a bit neater. And I think an example of that is just this very abrupt transition between these two segments, and it's two very different vibes going on. and I'll just play the transition just to get the idea. And the idea with this was to, with the different segments, is to also maybe going through the thought process of the character who is in this situation, who's going to be leaving Earth and going somewhere where they don't know. So I thought that just trying to have all those different emotions in one as well, trying to capture the thought process of this character, which is why maybe there's a lot of contrasting feelings going on and just these abrupt transitions. I'll just play it. Yeah, so it's clear that the contrast is very obvious in this section. It goes from a very electronic sound to still keeping a lot of those electronic futuristic elements, but also having these very pure sounding strings that come in that create a very soothing harmony. I feel like this is, in terms of the narrative, this is probably at a point where the character feels very calm, or not really calm, but just excited and just curious. I feel I think just curiosity of what could be out there on this journey is what sort of the emotion I wanted to capture, and I sort of did that through the string melody and also through the harmonies as well, where I've used diminished and augmented chords. Sorry, not diminished, suspended chords and augmented chords at the end of each measure to leave it very open-ended and not necessarily unresolved, but just sort of ends with a question of what could happen next. I think also because these harmonies can be quite harsh compared to just standard triads, it also adds to the contrast and just the mixed emotions as well. So yeah, if I open up the chords here, then you can see it sort of just follows a very basic pattern until the end, where it goes into the suspended chord and then resolves down just to the triad, which doesn't necessarily resolve the measure because the upper strings still leave it unresolved, creating a different harmony, but it does transition to the next section where you'd expect the same thing to repeat, but instead of resolving down, it actually goes up into the augmented chord, leaving a very open-ended measure. Yeah, so I think this is probably one of the more complex parts, even though it sounds very simple. The harmony definitely tells the story. I think it's just a very effective section to the song, which leads into the final section after, which is probably the most different sounding one, as it follows, it doesn't actually follow a chord progression, it stays on the root chord the whole time. And in terms of the narrative, this section represents the moments right before the rocket launches, and this character's sitting in their seat and they're just thinking, and they're trying to focus on making sure everything goes right. And it's just probably very stressful and just fast paced, but it keeps going through. Yeah, that's sort of what I want to represent in this section. I did that by using a lot of bass. It's very bass heavy, which in terms of just for the listener, you not only hear it in your head, but you feel it in your chest and in your body, which is probably just feels a bit more immersive in the narrative, which is sort of why I chose to do that. As well as just due to the nature of this section, how it just sort of is very stable on this one chord. It doesn't move around too much. I've tried to use lots of different effects and percussion to sort of bring a bit of interest and complexity. Yeah, so I'll just play a bit just to get the idea. And with all that complexity, it really represents, or I want it to represent, just all the different thoughts that's going through this character's head, which is sort of why it sounds very overwhelming and maybe a bit disorderly, especially with offbeat snares and just the offbeat kicks as well, just all put together almost to create an almost chaotic sound. And sort of just that feeling carries on for a bit until this sort of subsection at the end, which in terms of the narrative is the 10-second count off, which is sort of represented with these just these ringing or these beeping sounds right towards the end that lead right to the end of the song. I'll play it through just to get the idea. I sort of wanted to, in terms of just creating that beeping sound, it sort of reminds me of sounds you might hear on an aeroplane, which of course is very similar, and it's probably a more relatable sound to hear than one on a rocket ship. But that's sort of the idea, just the association between those, as well as having those those percussive sounds that sound like a clock ticking down. I'll just play these ones here. Very subtle, but it's you definitely feel it when you're listening in the whole groove. And finally, I think the other most notable part of this is this bending synth that plays in the middle of the section, sort of reminiscent of engines starting up and sort of just everything rising and coming together. I'll just play it. So it's a very quick rise up, and then it sort of goes back down and settles all until just settling down until this final moment, which it keeps counting down until the last note is played right at the end of the song. And it's a very, in terms of the narrative, it ends very open. But I guess I wanted it to be able to very smoothly transition to the next song, which will continue it. So yeah, that's the main idea behind this song here. I know I didn't go through the intro, but it wasn't too important in terms of the narrative, and it was more of just a musical idea to sort of just make the ideas feel more natural in terms of just the actual arrangement. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover with that. If you haven't heard the song yet, it should be up on the channel now as well. And yeah, I guess that's it for this month, and I'll see what I'll be posting. Probably nothing until then. So